Hello, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today, we are going to do a fast and loose Tonalist watercolor painting using Daniel Smith's Raw Umber Violet. So this is a mixture of PBR 7, which is the Raw Umber, and quinacridone Violet, which is PV 19. I'm not sure if PV19 quinacridone Violet is common among the acceptable student brands like Cotman and the Van Gogh brands, but I'm thinking that you could probably mix this tube, but let's see how it looks. So I have a quarter sheet of Stonehenge Aqua, actually just Stonehenge, sorry, it's 90 pound. And it's slightly toned. I believe this is warm white, and I just coated it completely. It does have a little bit more trouble than the regular, the Stonehenge Aqua, with laying down when wet. But let's jump into it. So I'm going to use the kind of wiping back and forth, wet and wet, that I've kind of just worked with over time and developed from the modern Tonalist masters, the Stuart Davies and the Dennis Sheehans. Two big people within the oil painting Tonalist movement. Alright, so I don't have too much of an idea in mind. I have found that a lot of my wet and wet, I've been going super wet and wet and really putting together the texture potential during that time period, and then almost doing a less of a detail, or maybe just kind of the finishing touches with the dry off stage. So this scene right now is imaginary, but a lot of the times scenes kind of come out of your head. Maybe something that you've done over and over again, or something that you've seen. This weekend, so it's Sunday right now, and I'm quite tired. I think I've just wound down and decompressed. Friday evening, went to New Orleans for a concert, and that was the first concert I've been to in years, and it was fantastic. It was Hell Young, which is a European band. Kind of historical, experimental, just a fantastic showing. Then yesterday, spent the day at the Audubon Zoo in New Orleans, which, my first time there, really, really nice. Beautiful oak trees, lakes, ponds, even like an amphitheater with kind of the columns. I took some pictures of that because if I'm in the mood for kind of some gothic landscape type painting, I think that would be useful. But to be honest, a lot of times I take pictures but don't wind up utilizing them. But a lot of inspirational scenes. So let's kind of talk about this pigment as we go along. I feel like right off the bat that this is going to be one where we're going to get a good tonal range. Curious what the softening is going to be like when we dry it off, what the tonal shift is going to take place. But because I'm getting that vibe, I'm going to use the paper towel to start pushing things back. And there's sometimes areas when you have the buckling take place where you get indented areas of water. Like if I lift this up, you'll see the water travel around just like that. And people can use that effect, or you can kind of pull water out of those to kind of minimize it. A lot of watercolors that paint wet and wet and coat their paper with water may have it on at an angle, and you'll see that pour that happens down in the middle. And that's a sought after effect for some people. Another thing is that if I was to dry it off like this, I use the blow dryer to dry it off, and it would push this water around, and eventually would have shoots of lines of beads of water being pushed. We would also have cauliflowering taking around that. If I let it dry naturally, which I honestly don't ever really do, if I do, it's kind of just staying in that wet mud phase and just letting it slowly dry and going through all the steps. I'm not quite sure how it would dry, but with my way of painting, that's just not feasible for me. With watercolor, it's a one and done type thing where I have the one session and I want to get it done. And the reason I say that is because if I was to stop this and let it dry, I would kind of be inspired to paint something else and then want to test out another tube. It's literally just my approach to art when it comes to watercolor. Same thing with drawings, etc. I prefer done in the moment. That being said, if I had oils, which I do, oils I spread out over days or months. And the funny thing about oils is, especially since I work small because of the price of the surfaces, the oils, initially the first step is very quick for me, and then it's like, okay, well, 15 minutes are done, and now I gotta let it dry or sit for a few days before I want to play with it again. Speaking of oils, next weekend is the Omelette Fest, where I set up and have my art for sale. I'm debating either an oil demonstration. I did that 2 years ago. I just kind of set up, bring out some panels and some oils and just oil paint. Or I've been using a lot of colored pencil, and I was thinking either colored pencil on black paper or toned paper. I'm not quite sure. I have thought a little bit acrylic, but if it's kind of the thing that throws me off is down here in Louisiana we have such weird, really weird temperatures and humidity that really affects the drying speed. If I'm out and about painting in watercolor, they would be dry by now. And the last time I did that, I don't think it was like particularly hot out. It's just the way the environment is. Which is funny. I remember reading James Fletcher Watson, a British painter, has fantastic books out. He's deceased, but he had talked about one painting, watercolor, where after the first stage he sat inside his car with his painting in front of the heater vent to dry it off to get it ready for the next part. And there's the book by Ron Ranson that's collected from students of is it Edward Wesson? Anyway, that gentleman would give demos and he would tell stories, learn about it, or talk about it. And one of the students realized that he was using that time where he was talking during the demo in order to let it dry for the next stage. So, like I said, down here in Louisiana, if I'm outside, it's going to dry quick. But if you're in England or other areas, yours might stay wet a while. In fact, there are some areas where people struggle with the cold, and I think rubbing alcohol gets mixed into their watercolors, where they use a stiff brush with warm water to loosen up their paints on their pan. There's an ink, fountain pen ink manufacturer out of Massachusetts. Cannot think of it. Nathan something. He makes the Noodler's inks, and he has a line that called Polar, and they're not supposed to freeze in freezing weather, just in case you leave your fountain pen in the car. In fact, I have the Polar Blue and I think Polar Brown, and those are actually really good for drawing and painting. I have to mess around with that some more. Speaking of inks, I picked up 2 handmade inks in New Orleans from Papier Plume, so eventually those are going to be in a video. And a glass, just the nib. It's Italian made, which I've used before and it's very good. Just whenever you're using glass nibs, if you're going back and forth dipping in water, if you hit it on the edge of something, you can chip it. I have one that's chipped somewhere that's been relegated to scraping oil paintings. So my towel is getting kind of wet. I'm about to switch it out. I want to be careful not to repeat patterns, but I pulled up a lot of the super moist areas to kind of control the way that'll dry. Let's see what else. Let me grab a new paper towel. These are the shop rags. You can get them in the automotive section of a store. They work very well for cleaning, wiping, swiping. I don't do this, but I'm looking for a brush in the closet. Okay. Grabbing the number 1 rigger for texture. Okay, so I used to have a rag set up for wiping my brush. I don't remember where I've read this, but this is a good tip. It was either James Fletcher Watson or I don't think it was Ron Ranson. It might have been Zoltan Sabo. I'm just taking the brush and making tree marks without adding any pigment, just moving it around while I talk. So they take a toilet paper roll and they wrap that toilet paper roll with paper towel, and that's what they're used to wipe and clean their brush between wettings. And I think the paper towel wrapped around the toilet paper roll just is kind of stiffer and holds its shape better and lets you really have something that'll last a while. If I had more room, I would actually set up something on the wall that I can reach and wipe it on. That'll be for whenever I buy a house. Anyway, so I mentioned very quickly that I think that this will be quite opaque, that there's going to be a value range within it. I don't recall seeing that in the greenish raw umber, German greenish raw umber. I had a little bit of pigment here. But I don't think I've done a solo painting with Daniel Smith's raw umber. So I'm curious what'll happen if we do that. And then the quinacridone violet. I think quinacridones are synthetic organic pigments. I'm not sure what other name that shows up under and the properties of that pigment. I think it's an interesting mix, and frankly it kind of reminds me of, I think it's pronounced Dachshund Purple, with lemon yellow, mixing those two together. That's the kind of vibe I'm getting from this. So if you look under my 2-tube or 2-color paintings, I have a playlist like that. You should see that on there. In fact, I think I have 1 or 2 up for sale on the Etsy. So if you want to check out my Etsy, I have that linked down below. And by the way, if you ever want to follow along, you're more than welcome to follow along with anything that I do, or just derive any inspiration from anything that I do, or completely regard it. It's your choice. If you do follow along, you have my express permission to obviously sign your own name and to sell anything you do when you follow along. I want you guys to have fun and have money for art supplies. And a huge thank you to everybody that supports this channel through the Patreon and through liking and subscribing and even sending super thanks on YouTube. So thank you so much. I use that to go back in and explore different colors, papers, mediums, etc. It's interesting how dark we can apply it now. We're still wet and wet. I'm working on getting the Zorn palette in acrylic inks. I found raw sienna, but I did not find yellow ochre, which is the Zorn palette yellow ochre instead of raw sienna. But I'm on the lookout. I might have to order some. The acrylic inks handle a lot like gouache without being re-wetted, and I think that's worth exploring with I guess they pronounce it aqueous medium. Anything that's suspended in some sort of water fluid solution. Looks like it's drying in these areas. It's still wet. If I was to touch it, you'd probably see a fingerprint. Yep. So you see how wet it still is, but looks tonally lighter, and I'm not sure if it's because of me just with the darker applications alongside it. Honestly, the best way to kind of just see that is if I was to stop right now and do a dry off, but I'm not ready for that. I do like these areas here. You can see that the raw umber took over. And that's what I like to see in like value explorations, is whenever we have either 2 pigments in a tube or just a collection of ochres or umbers or iron oxides that just settle at different levels. It almost seems like they naturally want to push towards an atmospheric effect, which helps us give us the illusion of depth along with other techniques. It is quite strange, and I wonder the origin of this pigment combination and who thought of this idea. And I personally think raw umber gets overlooked quite a bit. I didn't have it on my palette, and then I think during an oil painting session I started adding it. I don't know if it was derived from David LaFell or where I started doing that, but I kind of used it as a green, as a background color, as a dark. I would think just the violet, quinacridone violet, would be if you were doing flowers or wanted to put a little bit in the sky. Well, that makes me wonder if you had the two tubes, raw umber, quinacridone violet, and you played from there to see the mixing back and forth and have pure raw umber spots and then pure quinacridone violet spots. And you can do that with a lot of tubes. You don't need anything exotic. Very, very common one is burnt sienna and ultramarine. Going back and forth with the two of them. And then white and black would be the original back and forth. We haven't done any scraping. We did some pushing around. We did some lifting. Let's see what scraping tools I have on hand. What is this? Piece of rubber band. All right. So with scraping, I always mention this. If you have a really wet surface, you're just going to damage the paper and it's going to backfill it. It's just going to make dark lines. And if you want dark lines and to really get like the tonal range, that's an interesting way to achieve that. A less wet paper, more dry, and a rounder scraping edge will give you more of a white that'll stand at the end. And you can use a variety of scraping tools. This one was handmade by Mr. Mark. This one is just a hotel card cut up. Took all my energy yesterday not to keep my hotel card for scraping. Old credit card you can cut up. In oil painting you see palette knives used. Back of the fingernail. Seems like we're benefiting from a large quantity of scraping here, so it might be worth doing a dry off and seeing how this tones shift. So see how it is now, and then once the camera starts back up, you'll see how it shifts. All right, so this one had a very interesting shift take place. So as I hit it with the blow dryer, it lightened up some, but it also took a turn towards more of a earthy red. Not to the point of, I think, like a burnt ochre or a Venetian red or something like that, but it really seems like an earthy purple. That's very cool. That was a very interesting result of what it looks like dry. And I've seen that before with some reds and purples or earth pigments in general, where they start out maybe very orangey and then dry redder or browner. So I'm just kind of stippling, taking in some texture. If I was to keep going over a spot over and over again, I would create a wet area and then it would just start turning into wet and wet again. But I'm just kind of going around, adding texture, adding different layers of density. Hake isn't really wet at all. Let's see. Against my better judgment, I'm grabbing a wet wash. I want to bring some stuff out here. Play around with these land masses. I usually avoid the background in later stages, especially after the dry off. But I'd like to see what we can put in. The only time I really do this is if I was kind of painting a Hudson River Valley-esque scene where I have the mountains overlapping. I'm probably going to break across this with some straight from the tube. And let's see how that goes. Only somewhat, I don't want to say boring, but I don't know if the word would be tedious. It's just that we have to kind of dip right back and forth with the number 1 rigger. That might be why Ron Ranson suggested the number 3 rigger in his books to hold more water and pigment. But I wonder if what is this made out of? This is the silver black velvet, which I think is synthetic. That maybe an actual squirrel hair would hold more water and pigment. Alright, so we're putting these in pretty dark. And with the tonal value, along with starting them lower in the picture plane compared to things in the background, it gives us a sense of depth and it pushes them closer to us. We can come in and give the idea of their reflections. We really don't have to go wild with it. Just a few marks. Really depends on how far you want to go with it. Just pushing some light pigment around. I want it darker up in here. I think it's a very cool pigment. I do not regret getting this, even though I don't know what the final is going to look like. The paper towel to kind of move that around. Got to set it in place. You don't want to seem like the trees are just placed there. Little bushy part of the tree coming out here. There we go. think it's totally normal to talk to yourself when painting. Apparently, John Singer Sargent, when doing his portrait work, he would walk back and forth and he had paced out a line, like just wore down his carpet, and he would say, "That's how so-and-so would do it. Or that's how this painter would approach it," like to himself. Which is very interesting how one of the greatest artists ever would be thinking and referencing other artists as he worked. Let's do a dry off. We'll see how this looks. This is probably my heaviest application of the pigment, and we'll see what happens when I do my last dry off. Alright, so the heaviest application is our darkest, and it gives the great illusion of like a black. I am very pleased with this tube. The Tiger Eye that I did before this was more ethereal. This one feels more solid, and I think that's just the level of just intensity of coverage that we have. So I'm trying to sign my name more prominent on these, because sometimes I hide my name within the painting just so it doesn't seem to draw from the eye. But I do have people ask me to sign and date, and I'm like, oh well, there's the sign and date, but I'll start doing that now. I think today is the 29th. So I hope you enjoyed. Please like, subscribe, follow, and I hope you all have a great day. Take care.